Nobody cares about people like you. Now shut up, or you'll wish you were dead."
The words exploded from a bully's mouth as he and his friends tied Alicia Carter to a tree and left her to die. They thought it was just another sick joke. Sure, nobody would ever hold them accountable. But Alicia wasn't just anyone's daughter. Her father, David Carter, is a Delta Force commander, a man trained to strike with precision, to protect the innocent, and to unleash fury on those who cross the line. To the bullies, he looked like an ordinary dad. In reality, he was the last man they should have provoked. When the sheriff brushed it off as kids being kids, how far will a father go when the law refuses to protect his child? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Carter family's driveway as Angela helped Alicia adjust her backpack. "You've got this, baby," Angela said, squeezing Alicia's hand as they climbed into their silver sedan. "Just be yourself." Alicia nodded, watching their new house disappear in the side mirror. The move from Atlanta had been sudden, following her father's transfer. The small town of Riverside felt like stepping back in time, with its sleepy streets and old wooden houses. "I know, Mom," Alicia said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's just another first day, right?" Angela glanced at her daughter with knowing eyes as she turned onto Main Street. "That's my girl. Remember what your father always says? Stand tall. Think clear," Alicia finished, managing a small smile. The familiar words helped steady her nerves. The school parking lot was filling up when they arrived. Groups of students clustered near the entrance, their laughter carrying across the morning air. Alicia noticed how they separated themselves. White students on one side, the few black students on another. Her heart sank a little, but she lifted her chin. "I'll pick you up at 3, Angela said, touching Alicia's arm. "Text me if you need anything." Inside, the hallways buzzed with first-day energy. Alicia found her locker and carefully arranged her notebooks, taking deep breaths to calm herself. The bell rang, and she made her way to first-period English. Mrs. Peterson's classroom was already half full when Alicia entered. She chose a seat near the middle, not wanting to hide in the back, but not brave enough for the front row. The teacher, a thin woman with kind eyes, smiled at her. "Class, we have a new student joining us today," Mrs. Peterson announced. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" Alicia stood, her legs feeling slightly shaky. "Hi, I'm Alicia Carter. My family just moved here from Atlanta." That's when she heard it, snickering from the back of the room. Her eyes found its source. 4 boys lounging in their seats like they owned them. The leader, with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothes, whispered something that made the others laugh harder. "Thank you, Alicia," Mrs. Peterson said. "Brandon Hayes, do you have something to share with the class?" Brandon's blue eyes fixed on Alicia with casual cruelty. "No, ma'am," he drawled. "Just welcoming our new classmate." The boy next to him, Kyle, barely contained another laugh. He was lanky with spiky brown hair, his face twisted in a permanent smirk. On Brandon's other side sat Trevor, who watched everything with calculated interest, and Mason, whose massive shoulders seemed too big for his desk. Alicia sat down, her face burning. She could still hear their whispers, words she'd hoped never to hear again, words that made her skin crawl. She opened her notebook, focusing on the clean white pages instead of the hatred behind her. The morning dragged on. In every class, Alicia felt their eyes on her. They always seemed to be there, Brandon's crew, taking up space with their swagger and spite. In chemistry, Kyle accidentally knocked her books off the lab table. In history, Trevor made sure she heard him talking about keeping things pure. Mason just cracked his knuckles whenever she walked past. During lunch, Alicia found a quiet corner of the cafeteria. She picked at her sandwich, watching other students chat and laugh. A few black students nodded in her direction, but their eyes held warning rather than welcome. The message was clear. Stay in your lane. Keep your head down. The afternoon classes blurred together. Alicia took careful notes, answered questions when called on, and tried to ignore the paper balls that occasionally hit her back. She thought about texting her mom, but decided against it. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. When the final bell rang, Alicia gathered her things quickly. She'd almost made it to the front doors when it happened. Brandon stepped directly into her path, his shoulder connecting hard with hers. The impact sent her stumbling sideways. "Welcome to the real South, city girl," he said, with a smirk that showed perfect white teeth. Alicia's hands clenched into fists inside her pockets. She wanted to scream, to push back, to make him feel as small as he was trying to make her feel. Instead, she forced herself to keep walking, her steps measured and steady despite the trembling in her legs. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too cheerful for the darkness churning in her stomach. Other students streamed past, some pretending not to notice, others watching with quiet interest. Alicia kept moving, counting her breaths the way her father had taught her when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. 1 step, 2 steps. 3 steps away from Brandon and his cruel smile. She wouldn't let him see how much he'd shaken her. She wouldn't give him that power. But as she walked toward the parking lot where her mother would be waiting, Alicia knew this was just the beginning. The real South, Brandon had said, and she could feel the threat behind those words, the promise that worse was yet to come. Alicia's shoes squeaked against the freshly waxed cafeteria floor as she balanced her lunch tray. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter, but she felt oddly disconnected from it all, like she was watching through glass. Her sandwich and apple slid around on the plastic tray as she navigated between tables. That's when she heard it. Brandon's voice, deliberately loud enough to carry. "Hey guys, you think she knows anything about cotton picking?" Brandon's words cut through the noise. Kyle and Mason burst into exaggerated laughter, while Trevor smirked, watching for her reaction. Alicia's hands tightened on her tray until her knuckles went pale. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other, pretending she couldn't hear the cruel jokes flowing from their table. "Probably in her blood, right?" Kyle added, earning more snickers. Mason's booming laugh echoed off the walls. "Maybe she can give us some family history lessons." The cafeteria seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Other students turned to look, then quickly away, suddenly fascinated by their lunches or phones. Alicia spotted an empty table near the window and made her way there, her legs feeling wooden. As she sat down, her phone buzzed. Mom checking in, right on schedule. "How's your day going, sweetie?" The text read. Alicia's thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Behind her, Brandon and his friends were still going, their jokes getting worse. She could tell them the truth about the whispers, the stares, the way her skin felt too tight whenever they were near. But that would only worry her parents, and they had enough to deal with. "I'm fine," she typed back. "Lunch is good. Made some friends." The lie felt bitter in her mouth, but it was easier than the truth. She took a small bite of her sandwich, not really tasting it. Movement caught her eye. A girl with auburn hair was walking past, carrying her own tray. Emma. They shared English class. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma offered a gentle smile, sympathy clear in her expression. For a moment, Alicia thought she might stop, might sit down and break through this wall of isolation. But Emma's eyes darted toward Brandon's table, and her smile faltered. She kept walking, finding a seat with a group of other girls who were carefully not looking in Alicia's direction. Alicia understood. She wouldn't want to be a target either. Her phone buzzed again. "That's wonderful! Tell me all about them later." The enthusiasm in her mother's text made Alicia's throat tight. She pushed her tray away, appetite gone. The apple sat untouched, its red skin reflecting the fluorescent lights. Brandon's voice rose again. "You know what my granddaddy used to say about—" "Mr. Hayes!" A teacher walking past cut him off. "That's enough." Brandon ducked his head, the picture of contrition. "Yes, ma'am. Just joking around." But as soon as the teacher moved on, he was back at it, his voice a little lower, but just as cruel. Alicia pulled out her history textbook, pretending to study while letting her hair fall forward like a curtain. If she couldn't see them, maybe she could pretend they weren't there. The lunch period dragged on. Alicia read the same paragraph about the Civil War 3 times without absorbing a word. Every laugh from Brandon's table made her flinch internally, though she fought to keep her face neutral. When the bell finally rang, she gathered her things quickly. She'd learned it was better to be one of the first ones out, to avoid being caught in the crowd where accidents seemed to happen, shoulders checking her, feet appearing in her path. The afternoon classes passed in a blur of tension. In each one, she could feel Brandon or one of his friends watching her, waiting for any sign of weakness. She kept her answers short when called on, her eyes on her work. The final bell brought both relief and dread. Relief because another day was almost over. Dread because the hallways would be chaos. Alicia waited until most students had left before heading to her locker. The corridor was nearly empty when she reached it. The metal door squeaked as she opened it, the sound echoing off the walls. She was reaching for her history book when a shadow fell across her. "Hey there, city girl." Brandon's voice made her freeze. He was too close, deliberately invading her space. She could smell his expensive cologne, could see his Letterman jacket out of the corner of her eye. "Better learn your place," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear, "before someone has to teach you." Alicia's hands trembled as she shoved her book into her backpack. She wanted to turn around, to face him, to show him she wasn't afraid. But her body wouldn't cooperate. It knew better than her mind did about survival. She closed her locker with a soft click and hurried away, her sneakers silent on the linoleum floor. Brandon's quiet laugh followed her down the hall. She didn't run. Running would show fear, but her steps were quick and purposeful. Only when she pushed through the front doors into the afternoon sunlight did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her mother's car was waiting in the pickup line, a silver sanctuary. Alicia walked toward it, keeping her back straight despite the urge to hunch over and hide. She was David Carter's daughter. She would not break. She would not show fear. But as she reached for the car door handle, her hand was still shaking. The autumn sun hung low in the sky as Alicia shouldered her backpack, leaving the empty school behind. She'd stayed late working on a science project, trying to lose herself in the familiar comfort of equations and experiments. Now the parking lot was deserted, except for a few cars belonging to the janitorial staff. A cool breeze rustled through the trees that bordered the school grounds. The wooded path home would save her 15 minutes compared to walking along the main road. She'd taken it twice before, appreciating the quiet and the way the trees blocked out the rest of the world. Dried leaves crunched under her feet as she started down the trail. The late afternoon light filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns on the ground. Her phone buzzed, probably her mom wondering where she was. Alicia reached into her pocket to check it. "Well, look who it is." Brandon's voice made her freeze. He stepped out from behind a large oak tree, blocking the path ahead. Heavy footsteps behind her made her spin around. Kyle and Trevor were there, cutting off her retreat. Mason emerged from the trees to her right, completing the trap. Taking the scenic route? Brandon's smile was all teeth. How convenient. Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped her phone tighter, but before she could do anything, Kyle lunged forward and snatched it from her hand. "No calling for help," he sneered, pocketing the phone. What do you want? Alicia tried to keep her voice steady, but fear made it waver. Brandon took a step closer. Just wanted to have a little chat about respect. Seems like you still haven't learned your lesson. Get away from me. Alicia backed up, but Trevor was right there. He shoved her hard, sending her stumbling forward. Or what? Brandon laughed. Daddy's not here to help you. Mason pulled something from his backpack, a length of rope. Alicia's eyes widened. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They grabbed her arms, their fingers digging into her skin. Let me go! She kicked out, catching Trevor in the shin. He cursed and twisted her arm harder. Feisty one, isn't she? Brandon's voice was cold now. Hold her tight! They dragged her toward a thick tree, her heels leaving trails in the dirt as she fought against their grip. Her backpack was torn off and tossed aside, books spilling across the ground. You can't do this, Alicia said, hating how her voice shook. Someone will what? Brandon got right in her face. No one comes down this trail this late. No one's going to help you. Mason wrapped the rope around her, pulling it tight against her ribs. The rough bark of the tree dug into her back through her thin jacket. Kyle produced a dirty bandana from his pocket. Can't have you screaming for help, he said, forcing it into her mouth and tying it behind her head. The taste of dirt and sweat made her gag. They stepped back to admire their work. Alicia strained against the ropes, but they only seemed to get tighter. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not so tough now, are you? Brandon circled her slowly. This is what happens when you don't know your place. Maybe we should leave her overnight, Trevor suggested with a laugh. Nah, someone might find her eventually. Brandon shrugged. A few hours in the cold should do it. Mason picked up her scattered books, making a show of dropping them one by one into a muddy puddle. Her chemistry textbook, her notebook full of careful notes, her novel for English class, all ruined. Oops, he said with fake concern. Hope those weren't important. The sun was sinking faster now, taking the warmth with it. Alicia's fingers were already going numb where they were tied behind the tree. She tried to say something through the gag, but only muffled sounds came out. What's that? Brandon cupped his ear mockingly. Can't quite hear you. They all laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. A bird startled and flew away, wings flapping loudly in the growing silence. Let's go, Brandon said finally. Getting kind of chilly out here. Kyle tossed her phone into the undergrowth. Have fun walking home, if you make it. They sauntered away, their laughter fading into the distance. Alicia waited until she couldn't hear them anymore before letting the first tears fall. The gag soaked them up, making it even harder to breathe. The minutes crawled by. The rope bit into her arms and chest. Every slight movement made the bark scrape against her back. Her legs trembled from standing in the same position. Shadows lengthened around her as the sun continued to set. The temperature dropped steadily. Wind whistled through the trees, cutting through her light jacket. She tried screaming again, but the gag muffled any sound she could make. Her thoughts turned to her parents. They would be worried by now. Would they come looking? Would they find her in time? The cold was seeping into her bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. Alicia's head jerked up, fear flooding through her again. Was it Brandon coming back? A wild animal? She couldn't turn enough to see behind her. Footsteps crunched through the leaves, getting closer. A beam of light swept across the ground. A flashlight. Alicia made as much noise as she could through the gag, praying it wasn't someone else who meant her harm. Hello? A man's voice called out. Is someone there? The flashlight beam found her. There was a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God, the man said, hurrying forward. He was older, dressed in running gear, face lined with concern. Hold on, I'm calling 911 right now." The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Alicia's eyes fluttered open. Her body ached, and the hospital room's sterile white walls seemed to spin slightly. A warm hand squeezed hers, and she turned to see her mother's tear-streaked face. "Baby, you're awake," Angela whispered, her voice trembling. She leaned forward to brush a strand of hair from Alicia's forehead. "How are you feeling?" Alicia tried to speak, but her throat felt raw. A nurse appeared with a plastic cup of water, helping her take small sips through a straw. The cool liquid brought relief, though swallowing hurt. "Everything hurts," Alicia managed. Her wrists were bandaged where the rope had cut into them, and her back stung from being pressed against the rough tree bark. "How long was I—" "Mr. Thompson found you around 7. Angela's hand tightened on hers. "You were suffering from mild hypothermia. The doctors wanted to keep you overnight for observation." Memories flooded back. Brandon's cruel smile, the rope cutting into her skin, the endless cold. Alicia shuddered, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Angela quickly wrapped her arms around her daughter, careful of the IV line. "Shh, you're safe now," she murmured, rocking gently. "You're safe." A knock at the door made them both look up. A police officer stood in the doorway, notepad in hand. He was middle-aged with graying hair at his temples, wearing a crisp uniform with a name tag that read, "Officer Reynolds." "Miss Carter?" He stepped into the room. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to take your statement while the details are still fresh. Are you feeling up to answering some questions?" Alicia nodded, though her stomach churned. Angela sat back but kept hold of her hand. "Can you tell me what happened?" Officer Reynolds pulled up a chair, pen poised over his notepad. Alicia took a shaky breath. "I was walking home from school, taking the path through the woods. Brandon Hayes and his friends were waiting for me." "Brandon Hayes?" The officer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Councilman Hayes's son?" "Yes." Alicia's voice grew stronger. "He and Kyle Matthews, Trevor Wilson, and Mason Clark. They grabbed me and tied me to a tree. They gagged me so I couldn't call for help." Officer Reynolds wrote slowly, his expression neutral. "Did anyone witness this?" "No. That's why they picked that spot." Alicia felt frustration building. "But they took my phone. They threw it in the bushes. And my books. They ruined all my books in a puddle." "We'll look for the phone," the officer said. "Though it may be difficult to prove who put it there." "Did they say anything specific while this was happening?" "They said—" Alicia's voice caught. Angela squeezed her hand encouragingly. "They said they wanted to teach me about respect, that no one would help me. Brandon's been threatening me since I started school here." Officer Reynolds made another note. "Any previous incidents?" "They've been harassing me every day, making racist comments, pushing me in the halls." Alicia wiped at her eyes. "Yesterday, Brandon cornered me at my locker and told me to learn my place." "Were there witnesses to these earlier incidents?" "Other students saw, but—" Alicia's shoulders slumped. "Everyone's afraid of Brandon. His father has a lot of influence in town." The officer closed his notepad. "Well, we'll certainly look into this. Though without physical evidence or witnesses, it may be difficult to pursue charges. These situations can be complicated." "Complicated?" Angela spoke up, her voice tight. "My daughter was assaulted, tied to a tree, and left to freeze." "What's complicated about that?" "Ma'am, I understand you're upset." Officer Reynolds stood. "I promise we'll investigate thoroughly. We'll search the area where it happened, try to locate the phone. But these cases often come down to one person's word against another's." A familiar weight settled in Alicia's chest. The same heaviness she'd felt when Brandon first started targeting her. She'd hoped that once the police got involved, things would change. But something in the officer's careful tone told her otherwise. Thank you for your statement, Miss Carter. Officer Reynolds moved toward the door. Get some rest. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. After he left, Angela tried to smile reassuringly. At least they're investigating now. That's something, right? Alicia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The nurse came in to check her vitals and adjust her IV, mentioning that she could probably go home in the morning if her temperature stayed normal. The next evening, Alicia sat at her kitchen table, pushing food around her plate. Her mother had made her favorite, mac and cheese with extra cheese and breadcrumbs on top, but she couldn't summon an appetite. The empty chair where her father usually sat seemed to mock her. He was still deployed, unreachable for at least another week. You should try to eat something, Angela said gently. You need your strength. I'm not hungry. Alicia set her fork down. What if they come after me again? The police aren't going to do anything. You don't know that. Angela reached across the table to cover her daughter's hand. Officer Reynolds said they'd investigate. Now that it's officially reported, Brandon and his friends will have to be more careful. Things will get better. Alicia wanted to believe her mother's words. She wanted to believe that the system would protect her, that justice would prevail. But she couldn't shake the memory of Officer Reynolds's careful neutrality when she'd mentioned Brandon's name, or the way he'd emphasized the complexity of the situation. Maybe you're right, she said, picking up her fork again to make her mother happy. But inside, she felt more alone than ever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot as Angela's car pulled up to the entrance. Alicia's hands were clenched in her lap, her fingernails leaving half-moon marks on her palms. You don't have to go back today, Angela said softly. We can wait until next week. Alicia shook her head. No, I won't let them win. But as she walked through the main doors, her confident facade cracked. Brandon and his friends were lounging against the lockers, and their laughter echoed down the hallway when they spotted her. They didn't look worried or ashamed. They looked triumphant. Hey, tree hugger, Brandon called out, just loud enough for her to hear. His friends snickered. Alicia kept walking, her shoulders tight. She could feel their eyes on her back, hear their whispered comments. Other students quickly looked away when she passed, hurrying to their classrooms. No one wanted to be associated with her. In first period, she struggled to focus on the lesson. Every time someone shifted in their seat or dropped a pencil, she flinched. Kyle Matthews sat 2 rows behind her, and she could hear him whispering to his friend about how some people didn't know their place. By lunchtime, Alicia's nerves were frayed. She sat alone at her usual table, picking at a sandwich she couldn't taste. Across the cafeteria, Brandon's group was holding court, speaking loudly and gesturing in her direction. Several times they broke into exaggerated laughter. Emma, the girl who had smiled at her before, walked past with her lunch tray. She glanced at Alicia, then quickly away, choosing a table on the far side of the room. The message was clear. No one would stand with her. The afternoon dragged endlessly. In gym class, Trevor accidentally threw a volleyball at her head. In chemistry, Mason knocked her textbook off the lab table, spilling water on her notes. Each time, the teachers barely reacted, treating it as normal teenage behavior. When the final bell rang, Alicia practically ran to her mother's waiting car. She slumped in the passenger seat, finally letting out the breath she'd been holding all day. How was it? Angela asked carefully. They're not even pretending to be sorry. Alicia's voice cracked. The teachers saw them messing with me, but nobody did anything. Angela gripped the steering wheel tighter. We'll figure this out, baby. The police are investigating. They'll have to do something. At home, Alicia tried to lose herself in homework, but the equations blurred before her eyes. Every sound made her jump. A car door slamming, footsteps on the sidewalk, a dog barking. The woods behind their house seemed to loom darker than before. The phone rang around dinner time. Angela answered it in the kitchen while Alicia sat at the dining room table, pushing pasta around her plate. She could hear her mother's voice rising in frustration. "But, Sheriff Wilkins, there's physical evidence. The rope marks, the hypothermia." Angela paused, listening. "What do you mean, kids being kids? They could have killed her." Alicia's fork clattered to her plate. She crept closer to the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding. "No, that's not acceptable." Angela's voice shook with anger. "These boys committed a crime. They need to face consequences." Another pause. "I understand Brandon's father is an important man in this town, but—" Alicia didn't need to hear more. She ran upstairs to her room, slamming the door. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed onto her bed. They were going to get away with it. Brandon's father's influence meant more than her pain, her fear, her dignity. She heard Angela's footsteps on the stairs, then a soft knock. "Alicia? Baby, can we talk?" "Go away." Alicia buried her face in her pillow. "Just leave me alone." "Please, sweetheart. I heard everything." Alicia's voice broke on a sob. "They're not going to do anything. Brandon can do whatever he wants to me, and nobody cares." Angela opened the door anyway, sitting on the edge of the bed. She stroked Alicia's hair as her daughter cried, "I care, and your father?" "Dad's not here," Alicia choked out. "He's never here when I need him." As if summoned by her words, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps crossed the entryway. Alicia lifted her tear-stained face, hardly daring to believe it. "David!" Angela called out, standing up. "I'm home!" Alicia scrambled off the bed at the sound of that deep, familiar voice. She ran down the stairs and straight into her father's arms. Colonel David Carter stood in their foyer in full military uniform, his presence filling the space with quiet power. He wrapped his arms around his daughter as she sobbed into his chest. "They hurt me," she whispered. "They tied me up and left me in the woods, and now they're getting away with it." David said nothing, but his arms tightened around her. Angela came down the stairs more slowly, relief and worry warring on her face. "David, we didn't expect you for another week. I came as soon as I could." His voice was controlled, but Alicia felt the tension in his body. "Tell me everything." Through hiccuping sobs, Alicia recounted the whole story. Brandon's escalating threats, the attack in the woods, the police's dismissal, the school's indifference. David listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she described how Brandon and his friends had laughed at her that day, his jaw clenched visibly. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Alicia picked at her cereal. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from another restless night. David sat across from her, his coffee untouched, watching his daughter with careful attention. He hadn't said much since arriving home, but his presence filled the room with a steady calm. Angela bustled around the kitchen, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. "Would you like some toast, Alicia? You've barely touched your breakfast." Alicia shook her head, pushing her bowl away. The milk had gone warm, the cereal soggy. Her stomach was tied in knots at the thought of facing another day at school. David set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. "Alicia." His voice was quiet but firm, drawing her eyes to his. "I will make this right." "How?" Her voice cracked. "Brandon's dad owns half the town. Even the sheriff won't touch him. There are other ways to handle bullies." David's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes made Alicia sit up straighter. "Trust me." Angela paused by the sink, dish towel in hand. "David, what are you planning?" He didn't answer, just stood and kissed Alicia's forehead. "Time for school. I'll drive you today." The ride was silent, but Alicia felt safer than she had in days. Her father's presence was like a shield, solid and unwavering. As they approached the school, she spotted Brandon and his friends lounging near the entrance, shoving each other and laughing. David pulled into a parking spot with a clear view of the front steps. "Go on. I'll watch until you're inside." Alicia hesitated, her hand on the door handle. "Dad, what are you going to do?" "Don't worry about that now. Focus on your studies." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're stronger than they are, Alicia. Remember that." She nodded and stepped out of the car. The morning air felt thick with tension as she walked toward the entrance. Brandon spotted her and nudged Kyle, his smirk growing wider. "Well, if it isn't Nature Girl," Brandon called out. "Did you enjoy your camping trip the other day?" His friends burst into cruel laughter. Trevor made exaggerated tying motions with his hands while Mason whistled the theme from Deliverance. Alicia kept walking, her face burning. She could feel her father's eyes on her back, watching everything. The boys' laughter followed her into the building. From his car, David observed the scene with military precision. His expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He noted how Brandon positioned himself, always with his back to the wall, his friends forming a loose circle around him, the way they scanned for teachers before making their crueler comments, the casual violence in their gestures. He stayed parked there long after Alicia had disappeared inside, studying the flow of students and staff. He watched Brandon's father drop off a forgotten gym bag, noting the expensive car and the way other parents deferred to him. The school security guard's lazy patrol pattern, the blind spots in the security cameras. Throughout the day, David drove past the school at regular intervals, mapping the area in his mind. He observed which teachers supervised lunch period, which exits the students used, where the trouble spots were. He saw Brandon corner a freshman for his lunch money while a teacher looked the other way. When school let out, he was waiting to pick up Alicia. Brandon and his crew were roughhousing near their usual spot, but they fell silent when they saw David's car. Something in his steady gaze made them shift uncomfortably. "They were quieter today," Alicia said as they drove home. "At least to my face." David nodded, filing away that information. "Did anything else happen?" "No. They just whispered things when I walked past." She looked at her hands. "Everyone else still avoids me, though." That evening, after Alicia had gone to bed, David sat alone in his study. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of his encrypted laptop booting up. He pulled a steel lockbox from behind the books on his shelf and entered a complex combination. Inside were files from his military days, documents marked with classified stamps and code names, his Delta Force credentials, contact numbers that didn't officially exist, surveillance equipment that civilian stores didn't carry. He spread the files across his desk methodically, his movements precise and controlled. Years of training had taught him how to gather intelligence, how to identify weak points, how to apply pressure without leaving marks. He'd used those skills to protect his country. Now he would use them to protect his daughter. "They have no idea who they crossed," he muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard as he began his research. The screen cast a blue glow across his face as he dug deeper into Brandon Hayes' family history. Property records, business dealings, political connections. Everything had a trail if you knew where to look. He made notes in a small black notebook, his handwriting tight and precise. The walls of his study were lined with commendations and medals, testament to his decades of service. But none of that mattered now. This wasn't about honor or duty to country. This was about justice for his little girl, who still flinched at sudden movements and cried in her sleep. David's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assembled a small surveillance kit. Micro cameras, audio recorders, GPS trackers. Tools of his trade that would now serve a more personal mission. The irony wasn't lost on him that the skills he'd learned fighting enemies abroad would now be used against teenagers in a small southern town. The next afternoon, David parked his unmarked black SUV across from Riverside High School. He kept his distance, watching Brandon and his friends through binoculars as they loitered after the final bell. His military training had taught him the art of surveillance, how to observe without being noticed. Brandon's crew piled into his red Mustang, a 16th birthday gift from his father. David followed 3 cars behind, maintaining a careful distance as they wound through town. His GPS tracker blinked steadily on his phone, the small device he'd planted under Brandon's car, providing real-time updates. Their first stop was the Sunoco station on Main Street. David pulled into the car wash across the road, pretending to check his phone while documenting their routine. Brandon and his friends emerged with energy drinks and snacks, shoving each other and catcalling at female customers. The store clerk watched nervously, but said nothing. "Establishing patterns," David muttered, noting the time in his small black notebook. Every detail mattered. Their arrival times, who they interacted with, which security cameras they avoided. After 30 minutes of loitering, the boys drove to an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. David parked behind a grove of trees, using his high-powered camera lens to capture their activities. They passed around cigarettes, and what looked like a flask, growing louder and more reckless. Through his directional microphone, David picked up fragments of conversation. "Showed that Carter girl. Dad'll cover for us again. Nobody can touch us." His jaw tightened at their casual cruelty, but he maintained his composure. Emotional reactions led to mistakes. He'd learned that lesson the hard way in combat. When dusk approached, Brandon's Mustang pulled up to the sheriff's office. David watched from behind his tinted windows as Brandon strutted inside like he owned the place. Through the front windows, he could see Sheriff Wilkins greeting the boy with a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Just like I thought," David whispered, snapping photos of the interaction. The rot goes deep. Back home in his study, David connected his encrypted laptop to a secure network. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls to access public records. Years of intelligence work had given him skills that went far beyond basic military training. Property records revealed multiple instances of vandalism at local businesses, broken windows, graffiti, slashed tires. Each time, the complaints mysteriously disappeared from police files. Insurance claims were buried. Witnesses changed their stories. David dug deeper, following the money trail. Councilman Hayes had made substantial donations to the sheriff's department after each incident. Campaign contributions flowed to key officials who might have asked questions. "Setting up your own little kingdom, aren't you, Richard?" David murmured, downloading files to an encrypted drive. A pattern emerged in the timestamps. Brandon and his friends would vandalize properties late at night. Then Richard Hayes would appear at the scene early the next morning, checkbook in hand. The owners would be compensated for their silence, and Sheriff Wilkins would ensure no official reports were filed. David's research revealed more. Security footage from local stores showed Brandon shoplifting repeatedly, but charges were never filed. Church security cameras caught groups of teens drinking on the grounds after hours, but the tapes went missing. A convenience store owner who tried to press charges suddenly found himself facing health code violations. "Building quite a file on you, son," David said, organizing the evidence methodically. His military training had taught him the importance of thorough documentation. Each incident was cataloged with times, dates, and supporting evidence. He created a secure cloud backup of everything he found, knowing Richard Hayes likely had enough influence to make physical evidence disappear. The councilman might own the local police, but he couldn't touch David's military-grade encryption. Around midnight, David's phone buzzed. The GPS tracker showed Brandon's car moving again. He grabbed his camera and followed the signal to the historic First Baptist Church downtown. Through his night vision lens, he watched Brandon and his friends shake spray paint cans in the darkness. David moved silently through the shadows, his combat training allowing him to get close without being detected. He documented everything as they defaced the church walls with crude symbols and racial slurs. Brandon's face was clearly visible in the streetlight as he tagged his signature BH at the bottom. "Smile for the camera, kid," David whispered, his shutter clicking rapidly. By dawn, David had compiled a comprehensive dossier. Bank records showing suspicious payments, security footage of multiple crimes, witness statements that had been buried. And now, crystal-clear photos of Brandon committing vandalism while his father slept securely in his mansion, believing his son's actions would never face consequences. In his study, David selected the clearest photo. Brandon mid-spray, his face lit by a street lamp, the fresh paint still glistening on the church wall. He printed it on high-gloss paper and laid it carefully on his desk. "Checkmate, son," he whispered, staring at the damning evidence. The photo was just the beginning, the first piece in a carefully constructed plan to bring justice not just for Alicia, but for everyone these boys had terrorized. Alicia walked through the halls of Riverside High, clutching her books tightly against her chest. The whispers followed her like shadows, darting away whenever she turned to look. Students huddled in small groups, their laughter cutting through the air as she passed. In first period English, Mrs. Peterson handed back their essays on To Kill a Mockingbird. Alicia had earned an A, but the teacher barely glanced at her as she placed the paper on her desk. The irony wasn't lost on Alicia. A story about racial injustice, and here she sat, feeling just as isolated as Tom Robinson. "Look who thinks she's so smart," a girl behind her whispered loudly enough to be heard. Someone snickered. Alicia stared at her paper, the red A seeming to blur before her eyes. During chemistry, her lab partner Tyler accidentally knocked over their beaker, spilling solution across Alicia's notebook. "Oops," he said with a smirk, not even pretending to help clean up. "Mr. Reynolds watched from his desk but said nothing, suddenly very interested in his computer screen. By lunch period, Alicia couldn't stand the cafeteria's hostile atmosphere. She grabbed her sandwich and headed for the bathroom in the old wing, where fewer students ventured. Sitting on the closed toilet lid in the last stall, she pulled out her phone with trembling hands. "I don't know how much more I can take," she typed to Emma. "Everyone's acting like I'm the one who did something wrong." The response came quickly. "I'm so sorry, A. This isn't fair at all. Can we maybe eat lunch together tomorrow?" Alicia asked, hope fluttering in her chest. There was a long pause before Emma replied, "I want to. But Brandon's girlfriend Mackenzie threatened to make my life hell if anyone's seen being nice to you. I'm really sorry. I feel awful about this." Alicia's vision blurred with tears. She understood Emma's fear. She'd seen what Brandon and his friends could do. But the loneliness felt like a physical weight crushing her chest. "It's okay," she texted back, though it wasn't. "I get it. I'm here if you need to talk," Emma wrote. "Just maybe not at school." Alicia wiped her eyes with toilet paper, careful not to smudge her mascara. She'd learned to cry quietly, to keep her breakdown private. The bathroom door creaked open, and she held her breath as footsteps approached. "Did you see her face in English?" a voice said. "Mackenzie's. Acting all proud of her. A like anyone cares." "Brandon says her daddy's been snooping around town," another girl added. "Like, how pathetic is that?" Alicia pulled her feet up onto the toilet seat, making herself as small as possible. The girls continued gossiping, fixing their makeup in the mirrors. Their words felt like tiny daggers. "I heard she made up the whole tree thing for attention," Mackenzie said. "My boyfriend would never do something like that." When they finally left, Alicia let out a shaky breath. She checked her reflection in her phone's camera. Eyes red, but not too obvious. She had 2 more classes to get through. In history, Someone had scrawled "liar" on her desk in Sharpie. She covered it with her textbook, but the words seemed to burn through the pages. Mr. Thompson, no relation to the jogger who'd found her, droned on about the Civil War, never acknowledging the modern-day battle being waged in his own classroom. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Alicia rushed to her locker, wanting to get home before Brandon and his crew could corner her. A crumpled paper ball hit the back of her head as she grabbed her backpack. Laughter echoed down the hall. Her mother was working late at the hospital, so David picked her up in his SUV. One look at his daughter's face told him everything he needed to know. "Rough day?" he asked quietly as they pulled away from the curb. Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice yet. They drove in comfortable silence, David occasionally glancing at her with concern in his eyes. At home, she helped him prepare dinner, a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables. The familiar routine of chopping and seasoning helped steady her nerves. When Angela arrived home from her shift, the kitchen smelled of herbs and garlic. Over dinner, Alicia finally found her voice. "Everyone at school thinks I'm lying," she said, pushing a piece of broccoli around her plate. "The teachers won't even look at me anymore." Angela reached for her hand across the table. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm scared," Alicia admitted, her voice small but steady. "But I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let Brandon destroy who I am." David placed a strong hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle despite his military bearing. Pride shone in his eyes as he looked at his daughter. Not pride in her grades or achievements, but in her unwavering spirit in the face of cruelty. The dining room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock and the distant chirping of crickets. In that moment, Alicia felt both terribly vulnerable and incredibly strong. Brandon might have the school under his control, but he couldn't touch the core of who she was. "I just wish," she started, then shook her head. "Never mind. Pass the salad, please." David Carter stood before the school board, his military posture commanding attention in the fluorescent-lit conference room. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held the intensity of a man who'd faced down far more dangerous enemies than small-town bureaucrats. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, setting a thick folder on the polished table, "what you're about to see proves a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and criminal behavior that the school has repeatedly ignored." Principal Matthews shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Carter, we've already discussed." "Colonel Carter," David corrected quietly. "And no, we haven't discussed this." He opened his laptop and turned it to face the board. This footage was captured last Tuesday. The video showed Brandon and his friends spray painting racial slurs on the wall after hours. The timestamp was clear, their faces clearly visible in the security lighting. "There's more," David continued, clicking through photos. "Here they are, vandalizing cars in the teacher's parking lot. Here's Brandon Hayes selling pills behind the cafeteria. And this," he paused, his jaw tightening, "is what they did to my daughter." The image of Alicia tied to the tree drew sharp intakes of breath from several board members. Mrs. Rodriguez, a longtime teacher, pressed her hand to her mouth. "That's not possible," Principal Matthews protested weakly. "Our cameras don't—" "These aren't your cameras," David cut in. "I have training in surveillance that you can't begin to understand. Every photo is time-stamped and GPS tagged. Every video includes audio. Would you like to hear what they said while assaulting my daughter and recorded it on their phones?" The board members exchanged nervous glances. David pulled out more papers from his folder. "I also have signed statements from 12 students who witnessed various incidents. They were afraid to come forward before, but knowing there's evidence to back them up." He let the implication hang in the air. Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" "I did. The sheriff's department seems reluctant to pursue the matter." "I wonder why." David's tone made it clear he knew exactly why. But the school board has a legal obligation to provide a safe environment for all students. Failure to act on this evidence would make you personally liable. The threat wasn't subtle. Principal Matthews tugged at his collar. "We'll need to review this material," the board president said carefully. "Take your time," David replied, placing a USB drive on the table. "I have copies, and so do several news outlets, in case anything happens to mysteriously disappear." The meeting lasted another hour as David methodically presented his case. By the end, even the most reluctant board members couldn't deny the evidence before them. The next morning, Alicia arrived at school to find an unusual tension in the air. Students clustered in whispered conversations, phones buzzing with text messages. She kept her head high, walking to her locker as she'd done every day since the incident. Then she heard the commotion from the main office. Brandon Hayes stood red-faced before the principal, his father gesturing angrily beside him. Two security guards waited nearby. Kyle, Trevor, and Mason slouched against the wall, their usual swagger replaced by nervous fidgeting. "This is outrageous," Councilman Hayes shouted. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir," Principal Matthews replied, his voice carrying clearly through the open door. "That's why we're allowing your son to clean out his locker before the suspension takes effect, rather than having security do it for him." Alicia froze, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Emma appeared beside her, touching her arm gently. "They're all suspended," Emma whispered. 60 days. And they have to do community service." Students parted like water as Brandon and his friends were escorted down the hall. Brandon's face twisted with rage when he saw Alicia, but the security guard's grip on his shoulder tightened. "Keep moving, Mr. Hayes," the guard said firmly. For the first time in weeks, Alicia felt like she could breathe freely in the school hallways. As Brandon and his gang were led out the front doors, their parents trailing behind in varying states of anger and embarrassment, a weight lifted from her shoulders. Classes that day felt different. Teachers who had looked away now met her eyes. Students who had whispered behind her back now offered small smiles. Even the cafeteria seemed brighter somehow. "I saved you a seat," Emma called out at lunch, waving from her usual table. Other students made room, nodding welcomingly. Alicia sat down, unpacking her lunch with steady hands. The conversation flowed naturally around her: homework, weekend plans, normal teenage concerns. No one mentioned Brandon or the suspension directly, but their absence was like a dark cloud finally clearing. After school, Alicia walked home with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt since moving to town. The autumn air felt crisp and clean in her lungs. She even hummed quietly to herself, imagining the peace of the next 60 days. A group of younger students passed her, laughing and chattering. Mrs. Thompson, the jogger's wife, waved from her garden. Everything felt right with the world. Alicia turned onto Oak Street, her house just a few blocks away. The smile hadn't left her face all afternoon. She was so focused on this moment of victory that she didn't notice the mud-splattered pickup truck idling across the street, or the hatred burning in the eyes that watched her from behind its tinted windows. The peaceful evening shattered with the wet splat of eggs hitting the Carters' front porch. "Satti Kwansitui." Alicia jumped at the sound, peering through her bedroom window just in time to see Brandon's truck speeding away, his friends whooping and laughing in the bed of the pickup. The damage revealed itself in the porch light's harsh glow. Raw eggs dripped down the white paint, and bright red spray paint spelled out words that made Alicia's stomach turn. Her mother Angela stood in the doorway, hand pressed to her mouth. "Don't look, baby," Angela said, but Alicia had already seen it all. The racial slurs, the threats, the crude drawings. Angela grabbed cleaning supplies from under the kitchen sink, while Alicia stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes. The victory at school felt hollow now, poisoned by this violation of their home. "We should call the police," Alicia whispered. Your father's already on his way to the station. Angela handed Alicia a scrub brush, her voice gentle but firm. Meanwhile, we clean. We don't let hate stay on our walls 1 minute longer than necessary. They worked side by side in the growing darkness. The eggs came off easily enough, but the spray paint resisted their efforts. Alicia's arms ached, and tears mixed with soapy water on her cheeks. Each scrub felt like admitting defeat, like proving Brandon still had power over them. Why do they hate us so much? Alicia's voice cracked. We never did anything to them. Angela paused her scrubbing, pulling Alicia into a tight hug. Some people are so empty inside, baby. All they know how to do is destroy. But we're not empty. We're full of love and strength and dignity. That's what really scares them. At the sheriff's office across town, David Carter stood ramrod straight before Sheriff Wilkins's desk. His military bearing seemed to fill the small office, making the sheriff's attempted casual, lean look affected and weak. This is a direct escalation of criminal behavior, David said, his voice controlled but dangerous. They vandalized my home, threatened my family. I want action taken. Sheriff Wilkins smirked, adjusting his belt as he stood. Now, Colonel, let's not blow things out of proportion. Boys will be boys. You know how it is. Probably just letting off some steam after that suspension business. Boys will be boys. David's eyes narrowed. Is that what you'll say when someone gets hurt? When this escalates further? Sounds like a threat, Colonel. The sheriff's smirk grew harder. Stand down, soldier. This isn't your battlefield. You're not in command here. No, David replied softly. I'm a father protecting his family. That makes me far more dangerous. The sheriff's smile faltered for a moment before returning, oily and insincere. Way I see it, you're the one causing trouble. Coming in here, stirring things up with the school board, making accusations against good families. Maybe you ought to think about whether this town's really the right fit for folks like you. David stepped closer, his presence suddenly filling the room like a gathering storm. Is that a threat, Sheriff? Just friendly advice. Wilkins sat back down, shuffling papers on his desk in dismissal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real police work to attend to. David left without another word, but his silence carried more weight than any threat could have. Saturday evening arrived with a cool breeze and lengthening shadows. Alicia checked her phone, reading Emma's latest text about which movies they'd watch at their sleepover. After the vandalism incident, Emma had finally taken a public stand, inviting Alicia over despite what others might think. Are you sure you don't want me to drive you? Angela asked as Alicia packed her overnight bag. It's only 3 blocks, Mom. Alicia forced a smile. I can't hide forever. Call me when you get there, Angela insisted, hugging her daughter tight. Your father's monitoring the situation, but still... Alicia nodded, understanding what her mother left unsaid. David had been different since the sheriff's office, spending hours in his study with maps and computers, making phone calls in low voices. The evening air felt good on her face as she walked, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. Fallen leaves crunched under her feet, and porch lights began clicking on along the quiet street. Almost normal, almost peaceful. The roar of an engine shattered the calm. Brandon's truck squealed around the corner, cutting across her path. Before Alicia could run, Kyle and Trevor jumped from the bed of the truck, grabbing her arms. Her bag fell, spilling clothes across the sidewalk. Get her in, Brandon shouted from the driver's seat. Mason threw open the back door. Alicia fought hard, kicking and twisting. She managed to get one arm free and clawed at Kyle's face, drawing blood. But Trevor was bigger, stronger, wrapping his arms around her waist and lifting her off the ground. Help! She screamed. But the nearest houses were dark. Somebody help! Shut her up! Brandon yelled. Mason shoved a bandana in her mouth, muffling her cries. They forced her into the back seat, Trevor's weight pinning her down as Kyle slammed the door. The truck peeled out, tires smoking. Through the window, Alicia watched her overnight bag growing smaller on the sidewalk, clothes scattered like broken dreams of a normal teenage night. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Emma wondering where she was. But with Trevor holding her arms and Mason watching her every move, she couldn't reach it. Tears leaked from her eyes as Brandon drove toward the edge of town, away from everything safe and familiar. The truck bounced down an old logging road, branches scraping against the windows like desperate fingers. Alicia's heart pounded as Brandon drove deeper into the darkening woods, far from any houses or streetlights. The bandana in her mouth tasted like dirt and fear. "This'll teach her and her dad to mess with us," Kyle said from the front seat, dabbing at the scratches on his face. "Military man thinks he's so tough." Brandon killed the headlights before turning onto an even narrower trail. "Nobody comes out here anymore. Not since they closed the old quarry." Alicia tried to focus on landmarks through the window. A lightning-struck tree, a rusty gate, anything that might help her get her bearings. But the woods all looked the same in the growing darkness, endless walls of shadow and leaves. The truck jerked to a stop in a small clearing. Dead leaves carpeted the ground, and moss-covered boulders loomed like ancient guardians. Trevor yanked her out of the back seat, his grip bruising her arms. "Get the rope," Brandon ordered, and Mason pulled a coil from behind the seat. The same kind they'd used before, at the other tree. Alicia's legs went weak at the sight of it. They dragged her to a massive oak tree, its trunk wider than 3 men. Trevor held her still while Kyle and Mason wrapped the rope around her chest and arms, binding her to the rough bark. The bandana stayed wedged in her mouth, but they added duct tape over it this time. "Not so tough now, are you?" Brandon paced in front of her, twirling his keys. "Daddy can't help you out here. No jogger's gonna find you this time either." The others laughed, but there was an edge to it. They were scared too, Alicia realized. Scared of getting caught, scared of her father, scared of crossing a line they couldn't uncross. "So, what's the plan?" Mason asked, shifting from foot to foot. "We can't leave her here all night again. Her dad isn't gonna do anything," Brandon snapped. "My father owns this town. The sheriff, the judges, all of them. We just need to scare her good. Make sure she knows what happens when people like her don't know their place." Kyle pulled out his phone. "We could take some pictures. Show everyone at school what a joke she is." "No pictures," Trevor said quickly. "No evidence." Brandon grabbed Alicia's chin, forcing her to look at him. "Maybe we should cut off some of that pretty hair. Send it to her daddy in an envelope." Alicia held his gaze, refusing to let him see her terror. Inside, she prayed. Not just for rescue, but for strength. The rope bit into her arms, and the tree bark scraped her back through her thin t-shirt. But she wouldn't cry. Wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "This is messed up, man," Mason said suddenly. "We should just let her go. We made our point." "Shut up!" Brandon whirled on him. "You getting soft? Want to be her friend now?" "No, but nothing." Brandon pulled something from his pocket that glinted in the dim light. A knife. "We're going to make sure she never tells anyone what happened here. Never gets her daddy involved again." The others backed away slightly. This was going further than their usual cruelty, crossing a line into something darker. "Brandon, maybe we should think about this," Trevor started. "I am thinking," Brandon's voice cracked with hysteria. "Everything's falling apart because these people came here." He waved the knife wildly, and even his friends looked scared now. Alicia closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing through her nose. She thought of her father's quiet strength, her mother's gentle wisdom. They wouldn't want her to break. Back at the Carter house, Angela paced the living room, checking her phone again. No messages from Alicia. No answer to her calls. "David," she called up the stairs. "Something's wrong. Emma just texted. Alicia never showed up for their movie night." David appeared immediately, already changing from his casual clothes into dark tactical gear. His face had shifted into something harder, more focused. This wasn't the loving father anymore, but the Delta Force commander evaluating a threat. "How long?" he asked, checking his watch. "She left 40 minutes ago. It's only 3 blocks, David. She should have been there in 10 minutes. He nodded once, pulling equipment from a locked cabinet, a tactical vest, communications gear, a handheld GPS unit. "Call the police. Make them take a report, even if they resist. I need an official record started." "Where are you going?" Angela's voice shook. "To find our daughter." He checked a small tablet showing multiple blinking dots. "I put trackers in her shoes after the first incident, and I've been monitoring Brandon's truck through a device I planted last week. They're moving off-road, heading toward the old quarry." "David!" Angela grabbed his arm. "What are you going to do when you find them?" He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Whatever's necessary." The gear bag slung over his shoulder clinked with unknown equipment as he strode into the darkness. Angela watched him disappear, then turned to make the call she knew would be useless. The police wouldn't help, but they'd make a record. And when this was over, that record would matter. David moved through the darkness like a shadow, his boots making no sound on the leaf-covered ground. Years of special operations training had taught him how to become invisible, how to track prey that didn't know it was being hunted. The night vision goggles turned the world green, revealing every detail of the forest around him. He checked the tablet again. The red dot marking Brandon's truck was stationary now, about half a mile ahead. The blue dot representing Alicia's tracking device was in the same location. His jaw tightened as he remembered installing the tiny devices in her shoes after the first incident, hoping he'd never need them. "Better safe than sorry," he'd told Angela. Now those precautions were proving vital. The woods were silent except for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of small animals. David moved steadily forward, his specialized gear allowing him to navigate the treacherous terrain without stumbling. Each step was carefully placed, each movement controlled. He'd done this countless times in war zones across the world, but never with such personal stakes. A faint glow appeared through the trees ahead. Firelight. David dropped to a crouch, activating the directional microphone in his tactical gear. Voices carried through his earpiece, distorted but clear enough to understand. "This is boring," Kyle's voice whined. "We should just leave her here and go." "Shut up," Brandon snapped. "We wait until she learns her lesson." David's hands clenched into fists, but his training held. Rushing in without proper intelligence could make things worse. He needed to assess the situation fully first. Moving in a wide arc, he circled their position, using the terrain for cover. The ridge offered a perfect vantage point, and he belly-crawled the last few yards to its edge. Below, the scene spread out like a nightmare. They'd built a small fire in the clearing, more for light than warmth. The flames cast dancing shadows on the massive oak tree where Alicia was bound. David could see the rope cutting into her arms, the duct tape across her mouth. But what made his chest swell with pride was her posture. Head high, back straight, refusing to show fear even now. Brandon paced in front of her, playing with a knife that caught the firelight. The other boys sat around the fire, looking increasingly nervous. David noted their positions, their body language, the way they kept glancing at the woods around them. They were scared, unsure about crossing this line, but too afraid of Brandon to stop him. Through his tactical gear, David could hear their conversation clearly. "My dad's probably looking for me by now," Mason said, hugging his knees. "So what?" Brandon twirled the knife. "Let him look. Nobody knows about this place except us. Trevor stood up suddenly. This is crazy, man. We can't keep her here all night. What if what? Brandon got in his face. What if her daddy comes looking? Let him. My father owns this whole county. Nothing's gonna happen to us. David checked his equipment one final time. The GPS showed no other vehicles in the area. His thermal imaging revealed no other heat signatures nearby. Just 5 teenagers around a fire, and his daughter tied to a tree. The familiar calm of combat settled over him. He'd faced worse odds in worse conditions. But this time was different. This wasn't about completing a mission or serving his country. This was about protecting his child from monsters who looked like children themselves. Through his scope, he watched Brandon approach Alicia again, waving the knife near her face. Maybe we should give you a haircut, or maybe a few scars to remember us by. The other boys shifted uncomfortably, but none moved to stop him. David's finger twitched, but he remained still. Patience had kept him alive through countless operations. Patience would serve him now. He observed the clearing's layout, noting every detail. The truck was parked facing away from the main trail, hidden behind some bushes. 2 large boulders provided natural cover on the north side. The fire cast enough light to create blind spots in the darkness beyond its reach. Blind spots he could use. Kyle stood up, stretching. I need to take a leak. Don't go far, Brandon warned. We stick together until this is done. Until what's done? Mason asked, his voice cracking. What are we even doing here? Brandon turned on him, knife glinting. We're teaching her a lesson. Teaching all of them that they can't come here and change things. Can't get my dad investigated. Can't get us suspended. Can't act like they're better than us. David watched the group dynamics shift. Brandon's control was slipping, his mask of confident cruelty cracking to reveal the desperate fear beneath. The others were pulling away slightly, forming a loose semicircle that left Brandon isolated with his knife and his rage. Perfect, David thought. Let them separate. Let them doubt. He adjusted his position slightly, keeping his movements slow and controlled. The ridge gave him a clear view of the entire clearing, while keeping him hidden in the shadows above. From here, he could see every detail of their makeshift camp, the scattered backpacks, the half-empty soda bottles, the phone screens glowing as the boys nervously checked the time. Through his earpiece, he heard Brandon's voice rise again. Nobody leaves until I say so. Nobody! David's jaw clenched as he watched his daughter flinch at the sound. But still, she didn't cry. Still, she held herself straight against the tree. His little girl, showing more courage than these cowards with their knives and ropes could ever understand. Soon, he thought, soon they would understand what real fear felt like. David moved with practiced stealth, using the shadows and terrain to his advantage. Each step brought him closer to the clearing, closer to his daughter. Through his night vision goggles, he watched Kyle stumble back from the tree line, zipping up his pants. Alicia's eyes darted around the darkness, searching. For a moment, her gaze locked onto David's position, though he knew she couldn't actually see him. Still, some sixth sense must have told her help was near. She shifted against her bonds, drawing Brandon's attention. "What are you looking at?" Brandon demanded, moving closer to her. Alicia made a muffled sound behind the duct tape, shaking her head vigorously. The movement drew all eyes to her face, away from the shadows where David crept forward. "Maybe she saw something," Mason said nervously, peering into the darkness. "There's nothing out there," Brandon snapped, but his voice wavered slightly. David was 30 feet away now, using the boy's distraction to close the distance. Alicia continued her performance, struggling more dramatically against the ropes. Brandon grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Stop moving!" he hissed. That was David's cue. He emerged from the shadows like a wraith, silent and deadly. Mason, The largest of the group stood closest to his position. David's hand clamped over the boy's mouth from behind, his other arm wrapping around Mason's throat in a precise chokehold. The teenager struggled for 3 seconds before losing consciousness. As David lowered Mason's body quietly to the ground, Alicia kicked out suddenly, catching Brandon in the knee. He stumbled backward, cursing. The distraction was perfect. Trevor spotted David first. "Holy sh!" he began, but David was already moving. His elbow caught Trevor's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. As Trevor doubled over, David grabbed his arm and twisted, using the boy's own momentum to flip him onto his back. Trevor's head hit the ground hard enough to stun him. Kyle turned to run, but David's leg swept his feet out from under him. The boy crashed face first into the dirt, crying out in pain. David's boot pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him down. Brandon still held the knife, but his hand shook violently now. "Stay back!" he shouted, pressing the blade against Alicia's cheek. "I'll cut her!" David's voice was ice-cold and deadly calm. "No, you won't." Before Brandon could react, David's hand shot out, grabbing Brandon's wrist and twisting sharply. The knife fell from nerveless fingers as Brandon screamed. David drove his knee into the boy's stomach, then slammed him face first against the tree trunk beside Alicia. "You like tying up teenage girls?" David growled, holding Brandon's arm at a painful angle behind his back. "How does it feel being helpless?" Brandon could only whimper in response. David increased the pressure slightly, making the boy cry out again. "Please," Brandon sobbed. "Please, don't kill me." "Kill you?" David's voice was eerily calm. "No, Brandon. I'm not like you. I don't hurt people for fun." He spun Brandon around, slamming him back against the tree. The boy's eyes widened with recognition as David removed his night vision goggles. Mason was starting to stir, groaning. Trevor remained dazed on the ground. Kyle hadn't moved, still pinned face down and sobbing quietly. David quickly untied Alicia with one hand, keeping Brandon secured with the other. As soon as her hands were free, Alicia ripped the duct tape from her mouth, gasping for air. "Daddy," she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "Check my left pocket," David instructed her. "There's zip ties." Alicia's hands shook as she retrieved the plastic restraints. Following her father's calm directions, she bound Brandon's hands behind his back. David moved methodically through the group, securing each boy while Alicia held the flashlight from his tactical vest. Mason started to struggle when David approached him, but one look at the colonel's face made him go still. "My wrist," he whimpered as David bound his hands. "I think it's broken." "Yes, it is," David confirmed without sympathy. "Remember that pain the next time you think about hurting someone weaker than you." When all 4 boys were secured, David gathered them near the fire. They sat in a miserable line, heads bowed, some crying quietly, others just staring blankly at the ground. Brandon's face was already swelling where it had hit the tree. "The police are on their way," David informed them, though he hadn't made any calls yet. "Your phones are evidence now. Don't bother trying to delete anything. I already have copies of everything you've posted, sent, or deleted in the last month." Trevor's head snapped up. "How?" "I'm very good at what I do," David said simply. "And what I do is protect people from threats. Right now, that means protecting my daughter from you." He turned to Alicia, who stood trembling near the tree where she'd been bound. His voice softened. "Come here, sweetheart." Alicia stumbled forward into her father's arms, finally letting go completely. She pressed her face against his chest, her whole body shaking with sobs. "It's over," David said firmly, holding her close. "It's over." David pulled out his phone, activating the camera. The firelight cast eerie shadows across the boys' faces as they sat in their miserable line, hands bound behind their backs. "Let's start with you, Brandon," David said, his voice steady and cold. "Tell me about the first time you tied my daughter to a tree." Brandon's swollen face twitched. He glanced at his friends, then back at David. "I don't—" "Think carefully about your next words," David interrupted. "I have surveillance photos, text messages, social media posts you thought you deleted. The truth comes out tonight, one way or another." Alicia stood beside her father, arms crossed, watching Brandon squirm. Her fear had transformed into something harder, stronger. Brandon's voice cracked. "It was after school. We followed her on the path." "Names," David commanded. "Who was involved?" "Me, Kyle, Trevor, and Mason," Brandon mumbled. We grabbed her, used some rope from Mason's truck. We tied her to the tree and—" He stopped, hanging his head. "And what?" David pressed. "We laughed at her," Brandon continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Called her names, racial stuff, left her there in the cold." David moved the camera to Kyle. "Your turn. What happened when Mr. Thompson found her?" Kyle flinched. Brandon's dad called the sheriff, said he'd handle it quietly. Make it go away." "And the sheriff agreed?" David prompted. "Yeah," Kyle nodded. "Sheriff Wilkins always helps Councilman Hayes. Keeps stuff quiet. Like when we vandalized the church, or when Brandon got caught with drugs at school." Trevor started crying. "Please, my parents don't know." "They'll know everything soon enough," David cut him off. "Mason, tell me about tonight. Whose idea was it to grab Alicia again?" Mason cradled his broken wrist. "Brandon said we had to shut her up, teach her a real lesson. His dad said the family was causing trouble, needed to be run out of town. Did Councilman Hayes know what you were planning?" "Not exactly," Brandon interrupted quickly. He said to handle it. Make them leave. He didn't say how." David lowered the phone slightly. "Alicia, do you have anything to say to them?" Alicia stepped forward, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "You thought you could break me, that I'd be too scared to fight back. But you don't know me. You don't know what I've survived before, or what I'm capable of." She moved closer to Brandon, who couldn't meet her eyes. "You're not powerful. You're just scared little boys hiding behind your daddy's money and influence." "But that's over now." Brandon started to speak, but Alicia cut him off. "No, you don't get to talk anymore. You get to sit there and think about how you're going to explain this to everyone. Your parents, your teachers, your friends. The whole town will know what you really are." David recorded for another 30 minutes, methodically documenting every incident, every cover-up, every name involved. By the time he finished, the boys had confessed to dozens of crimes spanning the past 2 years. When red and blue lights finally flashed through the trees, David had everything he needed. State police officers, not local, swarmed the clearing, called by an anonymous tip about a kidnapping in progress. Dawn was breaking when David walked into the offices of the River Valley Chronicle, the local newspaper that had been struggling against Councilman Hayes' influence for years. Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter, was already waiting. "This better be good," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "It's not even 6 a.m. David placed a USB drive on her desk. Everything's there. Video confessions, financial records showing bribes, text messages, photos, every crime they committed, and every cover-up that followed. Sarah's eyes widened as she started reviewing the files. This is incredible, but Hayes will try to block publication. He owns half the town." "That's why I'm heading to the FBI field office next," David replied. "By the time Hayes knows what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it." The story broke just before noon. Sarah's article hit the Chronicle's website first, complete with video clips and documentation. Local TV stations picked it up within hours. By evening, state media had descended on the town. The arrests began that afternoon. Brandon and his friends were taken from their homes in handcuffs, charged as juveniles with kidnapping, assault, and hate crimes. Their parents watched helplessly as police cars pulled away. Councilman Richard Hayes called an emergency press conference on the steps of City Hall. His usual smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. "These allegations are completely false," he declared to the cameras. "This is a political attack orchestrated by—" An aide rushed up, whispering urgently in his ear. Hayes's face went pale. The FBI had just entered his office with a search warrant. I... Hayes stumbled over his words. The cameras caught every moment as he slumped in defeat. "I hereby resign my position on the city council. Effective immediately." Across town, Sheriff Wilkins received similar visitors. Federal agents escorted him from the station, his badge and gun already surrendered. The deputy who took his place immediately pledged full cooperation with the investigation. By sunset, the town was transformed. Groups gathered on street corners, reading the Chronicle's coverage on their phones. Parents huddled in worried clusters outside the juvenile detention center. TV trucks lined Main Street, reporters doing live shots against the backdrop of City Hall. The system that had protected Brandon and his friends, that had dismissed Alicia's suffering, was crumbling. David watched the coverage from home, holding Alicia's hand as they sat together on the couch. "They're scrambling," he observed as another reporter detailed the growing scandal. "The investigation will probably reveal even more corruption." Alicia squeezed his hand. They never thought anyone would stand up to them. 2 weeks after the arrests, Alicia walked through the halls of River Valley High with her head held high. The whispers that followed her now carried a different tone. Not mockery, but something closer to respect, even admiration. "Is it true her dad's Delta Force?" she heard a freshman whisper to his friend. "My mom says he took down the whole corrupt system single-handedly," another student added. Alicia kept walking, letting the conversations wash over her. Her locker, once covered in hateful graffiti, now bore a small collection of supportive notes and cards. Emma, who had apologized tearfully for not standing up to Brandon sooner, waited there with a warm smile. "Ready for chemistry?" Emma asked, falling into step beside her. "As ready as I'll ever be," Alicia replied, managing a small laugh. The classroom felt different without Brandon and his gang. Their empty seats were a constant reminder of justice served. Mr. Peterson, their chemistry teacher, had changed too. Where he once ignored Brandon's taunts, he now made a point of engaging Alicia in class discussions. During lunch, Alicia sat with Emma and a growing circle of friends. The cafeteria buzzed with updates about the ongoing investigation. Brandon's father faced multiple federal charges. The sheriff's corruption trial was set for spring. Local newspapers ran daily stories about previously buried incidents coming to light. "Did you see the news this morning?" Sarah, a junior, leaned across the table. "They found evidence going back 5 years. Other families that got run out of town, businesses forced to close." Alicia nodded. Her father had mentioned something similar at breakfast. The FBI's investigation had expanded far beyond Brandon's attacks, uncovering a web of corruption that had strangled the town for years. After school, Alicia checked her phone to find a text from her mother. Brandon's sentencing was today. Call when you can. She ducked into the library's quiet corner and dialed. Angela answered immediately. "Hey, sweetie. Just wanted you to know. Brandon and the others got 3 years in juvenile detention, followed by probation and community service. The judge wasn't playing around." Alicia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good. Their families aren't doing much better," Angela continued. "The Hayes lost their house. Bank foreclosed after the scandal tanks Richard's business. Kyle's parents are divorcing. Mason's father resigned from the school board. It wasn't satisfaction Alicia felt exactly. More like validation. The truth had finally come out, and no amount of money or influence could hide it. Walking home, Alicia noticed other changes in town. The Confederate flag that once flew outside the hardware store was gone. The city council meetings, once closed-door affairs, were now streamed live online. New faces appeared at community events, people who'd previously felt unwelcome. David's truck sat in the driveway when she arrived home. He stepped onto the porch, still impressive in his uniform, but softer somehow. The weight of secrecy lifted from his shoulders. "How was school?" he asked, hugging her. "Better. Different." Alicia smiled. "Mom told me about the sentencing." David nodded. "Justice takes time, but it comes eventually. Want to take a walk?" Alicia knew where they were headed before they started walking. The path through the woods was no longer a place of fear. Community members had reclaimed it, adding lighting and emergency phones. They approached the tree where it had all started. What had once been a symbol of terror had been transformed. Colorful ribbons fluttered from its branches. Fresh flowers lay at its base. Someone had attached a small plaque reading, "Stand strong against hate." Alicia touched the rough bark, remembering the rope that had once bit into her wrists. But the memory no longer held power over her. "Look at this," David said, pointing to a notebook secured in a weatherproof box near the tree. Inside, people had written messages of support and shared their own stories of standing up to bullies. "Dear Alicia," one note read, "your courage gave me strength to speak up about what happened to my daughter last year. Thank you for not staying silent." Another message simply stated, "This town is changing because of you." Alicia traced the words with her finger, feeling the indent of the pen strokes. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns on the ground. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, planted by volunteers to reclaim this space. "You know," David said quietly, "when I first got the call about what happened here, I wanted to tear this town apart. But you showed me a better way. You stayed strong, kept your dignity, and let the truth do its work." Alicia leaned against the tree, no longer feeling any fear. "They didn't break me," she whispered. David placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice firm with pride. "They never could." Around them, birds sang in the branches. New grass had grown where Brandon and his friends had trampled the ground. Nature itself seemed to be healing, much like the town itself. A group of students passed by on the path, waving to Alicia. They were part of a new anti-bullying committee at school, inspired by recent events. The old power structure had crumbled, making way for something better. Alicia and David stood together by the tree, watching the sun's rays dance through the ribbons. The place that had once held her captive had become a symbol of transformation, not just for her, but for an entire community, ready to face its shadows and change. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.